lot of experiences in life are supposed to bring sadness. So if it becomes a persistent state that is going on for days and weeks and months, then you have a problem. Then that needs to be treated. There are challenges with every generation, and I think they are getting more and more difficult. So if anything, I think my generation had it a lot more easy. Get help. Don't suffer alone. Because loneliness is not going to solve this.
It's going to make it worse.
When you yourself feel that you're actually finding this grief as a burden, you can't take it anymore. It's too much.
Namaste and welcome to the OddCast show where we talk about stuff that no one talks about. Today on this episode we have Dr. Bhushan Shukla ji, a famous and leading child psychiatrist from Pune, and we're going to talk about stuff that is going to blow your mind. So what's up, doc? How are you doing?
Surviving so far.
Okay. So I'm going to get straight right into this because a lot of my friends and my family around me have been telling me to seek mental help. They are talking. I actually, as I mentioned to you before, we got rolling. I lost my wife very recently, and I'm in mourning. I cry a lot, and a lot of my friends have been and family have been coming and telling me that, oh, you should definitely see a psychiatrist or a counselor, a grief counselor, somebody from the mental health profession, to try and ease your mind, etc. And I was like, hey, I'm mourning, I'm crying, I don't need any of this stuff right now. I don't feel I have the need for that. I have my family with me. My two beautiful children are there. My mother is there with me, and there's a lot of support that I'm getting from all of them. And I don't feel the need for this, but yet I'm being forced to do this. So is this a new norm that people are getting into? Is the word depression being used very loosely nowadays? Is my question, because I'm confused. The weatherman uses the word depression to describe the weather. The economists use the word depression to talk about a loss in the economy or the economic downturn. So it's I don't know. I'm just so confused right now, and I'm sure there are a lot of other people out there who are equally confused because mourning needs to be separated from depression, is what I feel. And I would just like to have your casual, candid thoughts on that.
It's actually quite significant, and we can say just by luck we have landed up in the middle of a international debate on differentiating between mourning and depression as an illness.
Oh wow.
Because a lot of experiences in life are supposed to bring sadness. Somebody in situation like yours who has lost a loved one recently, and as recently as just 3 months ago, if they were not sad, then that would be a question mark, right? That is this person okay?
That would be normal.
Exactly. That feeling sad when you lose somebody is the mourning, is the grief that we all go through. And again, there is nothing new about it. We know this, it has been documented since thousands of years. It's a normal response to loss of love, and we all are supposed to have that. Where it is different from depression is that in depression, you are questioning yourself, your self-worth. You are losing hope about your future. You have a total bleak and negative view of the whole world. And you are actually unable to function as a normal individual because of that intense sadness and hopelessness. When it becomes extreme, there may be lighter shades of that. But it is about self. What you are talking about is sadness because of an event, because of losing your wife of so many years. And so this sadness is the normal. It needs to be saved. Because as we have often talked, your intensity of love will decide the intensity of sadness when that love is lost. So I honestly don't think that normal grieving, normal mourning should be called depression. Even technically, it is not called depression. Grief can extend for a very long time. It can go up to a year or even 2 or 3 years.
But could be lifelong.
For some people, yes. There is an Afghan saying again, I don't know Pashto, but this is the English translation that is available to us, is that you don't bury your children in the ground. You bury your children in your heart, and they get buried only when you get buried. So there is a clear recognition that certain griefs, particularly griefs like losing your children, are lifelong griefs for those parents. And is everything going to be labeled a disorder, a disease, to be treated, to be counseled? And do people need to be counseled out of their normal grief? No, I don't think so.
So you're not afraid of losing customers.
I would rather not have those customers. I would rather not have those falsely labeled people, normal people, who are being labeled as patients and forced into treatments.
So what do you think has led to this? Like, I'm sure, when you were growing up, when I was growing up, we never heard these terms so loosely talked about. Nowadays I see a lot of people around me, just as they go to the gym in the morning, or, they go for a workout in the morning, in the evening, they are seeing some sort of, either it's a counselor or a therapist or a, psychiatrist or a psychologist. So it's just become a normal. Is it a fad, or is it what's happening here?
See, it's a tricky situation where for a long time we have had this tradition or our culture where serious mental illnesses were actually ignored.
Right.
So people who desperately needed professional mental health help never got any, either because that help was not available or because there was a stigma attached to it, so people wouldn't take that help. And on the other hand, we are in a situation which is very typical of psychiatry, where, see, this doesn't happen with any other specialty of medicine. There is no normal variant of typhoid or cancer. But in psychiatry, we are left with these labels, which are actually normal emotions, normal human experiences, which are also labeled as diseases. So somebody feeling sad is a universal experience. Somebody feeling depressed as an emotion is, I mean, you're an Arsenal fan. We can see that all around here. Your team loses a match or two every now and then. And I'm sure on that
Not this
particular
season.
day,
Not
not
this
this
season.
season, you're doing well so far.
Yeah.
So when that happens, you do feel sad,
Absolutely.
right? And you would declare that I'm feeling very depressed. But is that your permanent state?
You mean I would use that term loosely?
Loosely. Again, I wouldn't call it wrong because that is the colloquial meaning of depression. But psychiatry picked up that word like anxiety, and in the clinical sense, when people have that disorder, which Freud had identified as melancholia, and they gave it the same name.
So you mean to say that they were too lazy to pick up and find a new word for it, or they just...
Well, it's ungrateful to criticize ancestors by our Indian tradition,
course.
but I do think it is laziness using the same. We should have coined new terms for that.
What would you coin it as today?
Oh, honestly,
If you
I
were
don't
given
have
the
that
authority.
level of creativity.
No, but if you were given the authority to, put a word to it,
I would go back to melancholia.
melancholy.
I think that is a word that has already been used. It has a track record, and we would go to that.
So, since you use the word depression a lot, how would you say what depression really is? Because from what I understand, they use it across different fields and professions. How would you define that?
So, depression as a psychiatric disorder, as something that requires treatment in some form or the other. It requires some intervention, something that is not going to get better by itself, and if it is left untreated, is going to lead to something much worse. If we have to look at that entity with all these caveats there, then depression is a state where your mood is persistently low. Most of the times, it will not be elevated to normality, even with things that normally you enjoy. For example, if I am in a state of depression as a disease, normally things which give me joy, which is sitting with my friends, enjoying a
They
conversation.
won't give you that pleasure anymore.
Exactly. My mood won't lift, or if it lifts, it would be really momentarily, and
then
it would sink
correct,
again.
right.
Then I have very low energy to go about my day. I feel very negative, not only about myself, but about the world that I'm living in and about my future. Mainly, I have a very bleak view of my entire life, about my past, my present, my future, and everything. And this doesn't move. See, all of us can be in this state for a few moments. okay, for a few hours maybe, depending on how strong our experience is at that point of time. But we don't stay in that state, we come out. So if it becomes a persistent state that is going on for days and weeks and months, then you have a problem, then that needs to be treated.
Correct, correct. So, and also, I've noticed that there are a lot of these mental health centers that are not open 24/7 because they say ki if you want to commit suicide, then you do it after 5 o'clock because our thing is shutting down at 5 o'clock. So, do you think that these things should be open 24/7? And if they give professional medical help, then how do they do it? In what form?
See, emergency care, and if we have to look at mental health, which is healthcare part, then it should be available round the clock.
Okay,
Ideally, every doctor who treats patients in emergency
it's open.
should have a
24/7. Yeah.
training in dealing with mental health emergencies as well,
Which is not the case.
which currently is not the case. See, when I went to medical college and I did my MBBS, uh, psychiatry was a 15-day clinical term out of 5.5 years of
That's it.
training. That's it. And psychiatry used to be a short note asked in one subject, medicine. That's all. So out of 1400 marks of my final MBBS exam, psychiatry was a 5-mark short note, which you could put for option. Because
That's
there were other, yeah, that was all that was there. And I'm talking about 1993, 94.
And fast forward to today,
Now you have a lot more weightage given to psychiatry, and it is changing. As we speak, National Medical Commission is giving more and more weightage to psychiatry. Neurology trainees, medicine trainees, even gynecology trainees spend some time in psychiatry, get some experience there. But the bulk of doctors that already exist or who are practicing have little or almost no idea about mental health at all.
wow.
So sometimes you get extremely negative statements from your fellow professionals.
Really?
So unless majority of the doctors are hit by a mental health disaster themselves, they actually don't appreciate how mental health works. That is the reality of India right now.
Wow. That's scary.
It is. It is. And I have seen that in practice. There are few doctors who are tuned to mental health, who pick up the disorders very quickly and are able to convince those patients that you need help. That is not a help that I can give as a doctor. You need to see a psychiatrist, and they'll refer them on at all ages. But I would say majority, 90% of the doctors would have no clue what it actually looks like, because they have never seen it. They have never been taught. See, it's not their fault. You can only see what you have been taught.
Absolutely.
And they are not taught about it at all.
So, do you think that earlier the reason why they were not taught and why it's changing now is because there is a sudden rise in anxiety and mental health and depression and cases like that? And would you blame the smartphone, if I may, to a certain extent to that? Because I keep hearing that, earlier there were, like when I was growing up, we were always outdoors playing a sport or, just fooling around with our friends or whatever it was. We were outdoors. And nowadays, you see a lot of kids on their smartphones all the time. They're always stuck onto their smartphones. And there is a lot of social media which plays a part to it where, if they don't get instant gratification from, putting up a post or a video or something like that, they actually go into anxiety and depression. And a lot of them are landing up in clinics like yours.
Let me use an analogy.
Sure.
Say 300 or 400 years ago, the weapons that were available were not as devastating as the weapons we have now. Still, the wars were quite frequent. In fact, they were a lot more frequent than there are now. And many more people used to get killed if you compare it with the entire population. Now, though we have weapons that can vaporize the earth within minutes, we are actually losing less people in war. So though the weapons have gotten more potent, people actually dying of them have reduced. I would say the same thing about technology. There is no point blaming the technology, because the same smartphone that can take you to TikTok or Instagram and make you feel horrible about yourself is the same phone which you can dial up and look up mental health information available there and find a person nearby to you and within your budget who can offer that help.
Right.
So it's just a tool.
True, maybe
What it does, how are you using it? If it is making you feel more lonely, if it is taking you away from your connections of friends and family and society, and if you are using that to continuously look at people and their fake videos or their fake life, which is infinitely better than yours all the time, then you are going to be miserable and alone.
Right. So that means that, I would draw a conclusion from this saying that you have to be mature enough to know how to use it, right?
You have to know what is the potential harm of that.
Right.
When I get a driving license, though Indian RTO doesn't insist on that, I know that this is a dangerous thing. And if I'm not careful with this vehicle, I'll not only kill myself, I'll hurt other people as well.
Absolutely.
And I use it with responsibility. Most of us do.
Right.
But your phone does not come with any such warning. And parents are more than happy to give this extremely powerful tool. It is like giving a child a gun with live bullets.
Absolutely.
And then we are saying, why is this child hurting himself? Why is he or she shooting themselves in the foot? I mean, who gave them the gun in the first place? Was it not our responsibility as adults?
True.
So speaking of parents who give their children phones at young ages, what age would you recommend for them to start giving it at? Because my dad was very strict with these things, and I always used to come and ask him as a teenager, "Ki mere ko kyun nahi mila? Why didn't I get?" And now I see that my sister got it at a very young age. So now I realize ki I used to be jealous ki why did she get it, and now I'm like, okay, it's her choice. She's only going to go down that path now. So what age would you recommend for parents to give it to their kids?
Sumit, I think we that ship sailed.
Okay.
Of doctors or neuroscientists talking about a reasonably safe age and people actually sticking to that.
Yeah.
Because COVID happened.
Yeah.
And entire education, entire work, everything had to be moved online. So almost every child whose parents could afford, and many children whose parents could not even afford, somehow managed to procure an internet-enabled screen.
Yeah.
Either their laptops, tablets, phones, or whatever they could get to keep their children in education.
Correct.
And once you have something in your hand for 2 years,
It's hard
you're
to let
not
go.
going to let it go.
Absolutely. I wouldn't.
Yeah. So now again, if somebody is going to have a baby today, my suggestion would be, and it's not my personal suggestion, a lot of pediatric associations, neurology associations, child psychiatry associations, developmental pediatrics associations have come up with their own guidelines, and none of them say that you should give your child a smartphone or an internet enabled screen before age of 2 or 3 years at all. And even after that, it should be monitored what you let them watch on that, for how long, and that has to gradually increase to become autonomous by the time they're 15 or 18. It can't be something that you start straight away at birth
Absolutely.
and have no checks on that.
Yeah, because I see kids around me, and relatives, etc., friends, their children, etc. They don't eat their food without a smartphone. The child, even the baby, he or she needs to be watching something on the screen, something going on, something is on, and otherwise they don't eat food. So
And
this
something
is,
pretty similar has happened to the family as well. They all of them pick up their plates, sit in front of the TV,
Yeah.
and watch Netflix or whatever their
or
favorite
even
thing is.
restaurants. Four friends go to a restaurant, and they're like all on their phones. They're not even chatting with each other.
Yeah.
So-
Most of the restaurants have big screens where your favorite match or something like that is going on all the time.
Yeah.
Right? You're supposed to meet there.
But despite that, it's so addictive, and we as adults can't control ourselves. How do we expect children to do that? So also talking about COVID, you mentioned about COVID, that during COVID these changes happened. And have you seen an increase in patients seeking mental health post-COVID in your practice? And
So-
why? If yes, why?
See, COVID has been a stress test of every human system that was ever created, including medicine and mental health as well. I would say including our family life. Some people actually benefited from it. Let's not paint COVID black completely.
Yeah.
There were a lot of people who actually got a chance to catch up on their relationships, get some personal time. People who were not affected by COVID or were affected very mildly were actually able to get back to good quality life because of that forced isolation
Yeah.
from rest of the world and forced togetherness for the family. And at the same time, some people suffered. So people who felt more isolated, who had very negative experiences in COVID, who lost friends, families, jobs, money, position, homes, or who got trapped into the internet related world during COVID have obviously suffered. And I do see a throw off of that in my practice even now, 2 years, 2.5 years after all the lockdowns have gone away. We still have children who are unable to put down that phone and go out and play.
So the aftermath is still on.
Absolutely there. It's absolutely there.
And you all are dealing with it.
Yes. So if I am able to buy a flashy car, say in next 2 years, it will be because of COVID. With regular practice, I wouldn't have been able to do that. But this is something, see, I mean, we're laughing about it. But the thing is that this is how it works, right? Everything in this new world will be good for somebody and bad for somebody. There are people making money even during wars.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Why waste a good crisis? I think somebody said that.
I read somewhere in the newspaper a couple of days ago that, the world is heading towards a psychiatric epidemic where, there is so much of, like I mentioned, so many people are going for mental health in different forms. Everyone's talking about it. Everyone's going for it. Are we heading in some direction which is unsalvageable in the near future? Are we going towards a point where there is a point of no return where, all of us who's normal then?
So talking about just psychiatric illnesses, I think I remember one quote by, was it Yogi Berra or Richard Feynman or Niels Bohr? The owner of the quote keeps changing, is that it's particularly difficult to predict, especially about future. So we don't know what is going to happen 20 years from now. We don't know how these things are going to change. When I was a kid going to school, everybody was talking about population explosion and population reaching a level where everybody will be in a condition like Africa where there's famine. At that time, there was famine in Africa. And we were all scared of it. And here we are today with surplus resources literally in most major big countries all over the world. Right? So we don't know. I'm a firm believer in human resilience, human ability to innovate, human ability to take a stock of where we are and change path. Looking at where we were at the end of Second World War, I think we have done pretty much well since then.
So one point I'd like to clarify is that the two terms psychologist and psychiatrist have been interchanged and exploited beyond recognition. So before we proceed, I'd just like you to give some context to the listeners as to what is the actual difference between the two.
So actually, there is a legal difference.
Okay.
Psychiatrists like myself come from medical background. We have done our basic medical degree like MBBS in India. Then we do a post-graduation, MD, in psychiatry. And then some of us go on to do super specialization like child psychiatry or geriatric psychiatry or addiction psychiatry for further 2 years or 1 year fellowship. So it's a medical route. Whereas psychologists come from humanities and arts background. So they have done their BA or BSc in psychology, then they do their MA, then they do their MPhil or PhD in psychology. The difference in work is that psychiatrists have the additional training to diagnose and prescribe medications when they are necessary, to coordinate the treatment because they are the ones who are trained in what is called as a biopsychosocial model.
Yeah.
The three main components of mental health.
Yeah.
And coordinate the treatment. Whereas psychologists are trained in diagnosing as well as giving psychological therapies. And some psychologists are trained to do the tests as well, the assessments as well. Like if you say, for example, if you have ADHD or autism, you will need to be assessed in a standardized way and a test report will have to be given.
Yeah.
That's called psychometry.
Yeah.
So psychologists are trained to do psychometry. Psychiatrists don't have that.
Okay.
And would a grief counselor or a therapist also be leaning towards a psychologist or?
So they could be a psychologist or they could be a psychiatrist as well, because a lot of psychiatrists also have additional training in psychotherapy.
Okay.
So psychology training is part of psychiatry. Only thing that they cannot do is do the psychometric tests.
Very interesting.
And then in India, we have a huge gray zone of people who call themselves counselors.
Yeah.
There is no clear definition of a counselor.
Every third person is like...
Anybody with a couch and a
Yeah.
room can call themselves a counselor. There are even weekend courses that are run or distance learning courses. I mean, would you go to a cardiac surgeon who has learned cardiac surgery in distance learning or a correspondence course? But you have entire universities in India who give degrees which are called Masters of Science,
No, even
MS.
diplomas.
Yeah.
Just as short as 3 months.
Yeah. You can do MS in
Yeah.
psychology either online or by distance learning in India now.
So what would you attribute this to? Is it people are just vulnerable or they have no clue? I mean, like, shouldn't a patient or his or her family, while, who realizes that, okay, there is a person in my family who needs mental health, who do they go to then? Should they go to a psychiatrist or should they go to a psychologist or should they go to a therapist? And how do they pick who's the right one?
My suggestion would be they should talk to their family doctor first. Your family doctor is the person who's in best position to direct you in appropriate direction. I wouldn't say that the moment you feel sad, go and see a psychiatrist or go and see a psychologist. Talk to your family doctor first, who knows you very well. Most of the family doctors are quite updated. They know what is happening around. They will also know who is a truly trained person in your area or around you.
Yeah.
So having a trusted family doctor and taking their advice about it would be a very sensible first step, at least in India.
And now that you mentioned India, I just wanted to, look at the world versus India, especially the westernized world, where we see a lot of more of, loneliness, depression, kids, they're depressed. You keep hearing about in the West that, this child was depressed. And, so, he or she picked up a gun and went into a school and shot 20 other kids and all that. So, where is, like, are they in an advanced stage of depression? And there's a book also called Prozac Nation, where they say that, half of America is literally having that psychedelic drug to try and cure themselves and get themselves out of this. So, do you think that, with this term being so loosely used in India now, in the last 10, 15 years, are we heading in that direction? And what can we do to prevent it?
I think when we say Western world, there are two Western worlds. One is the US of A, and then there is rest of Western world. The guns and the epidemic of violence that we talk about is quite exclusively US driven.
Yes, absolutely.
The rest of the Western world is doing quite all right. The loneliness part, I think that is a global, that's the pandemic. That we are less connected to other people. We don't know about them. We are more and more disconnected from our family as well, friends as well. We move about a lot. In a single lifetime, we have, most people move about now. Most as in people who are well educated, who are constantly looking for a better paying job and opportunity and education, do move about a lot and get disconnected from their roots. So this is the difficult part of the modern world. So I think we Indians, we take pride in our family system, in our society, in our cohesiveness, have something to learn there.
I mean, they need to learn from us.
Well, we have to learn and preserve it ourselves first.
Absolutely, exactly.
Because they may learn it and start implementing it, and then we may
lose out
import
on
it back from them again.
We may lose out on it.
Yeah.
Do you think people from my generation, as you being a child psychiatrist, are heading in that same direction as US?
To tell you very honestly, I wouldn't want to be in your position, your generation's position right now,
Yeah.
for mental health. For
Okay.
opportunities, yes.
Of course. Yeah.
For a big open world, a less violent world, absolutely yes. And being 18-year-old, absolutely yes. But I think you guys have it particularly difficult because just surviving, just being with your family, or not creating trouble for family, which was enough for my generation, is not enough for you anymore. You guys constantly have to push themselves to achieve more and more and more.
Yeah.
I was okay doing all right in my class. People who are 17, 18-year-old now have to do better than not just the school, but the state and the nation and sometimes the international standards. And it just doesn't end there. You need to look better. You need to have a better girlfriend or a boyfriend. Just being good in studies is not enough. You need to have something else as well.
That FOMO thing is kicked in really hard now.
Then you need to have a YouTube channel and you need to have so many followers on Instagram. It's difficult life.
Yeah.
Too much of emphasis is being paid on.
Social validation.
And being successful on every front, and this is the success. that they are talking about. So I think I have full sympathies for people who are growing up just now. They live a very, very difficult life, a very challenging. It's not a surprise that they are more anxious, that they are more worried, that they don't feel grounded. They feel unsure of things around them
Yeah,
because the
definitely.
world is so fluid and they are supposed to win everything that they touch.
Exactly.
I don't think anybody can stand up under that pressure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Something ironic I thought of is that you said we have it particularly hard. A lot of people, adults, especially the generation above me, say that we have it particularly easy because everything is being given to us on a platter, which is not completely wrong. But for example, in your generation, if some teacher had an issue with you, which is very common nowadays, and you went and told your parents that this teacher having a problem with me, what do I do? They would say just ignore her for now. Who cares? It doesn't matter. Just try and rough it out. Nowadays, if someone from my generation comes and says that, oh, I have a problem with this teacher, or she has a problem with me, they're like, okay, let's go and get the teacher fired. Let's do this. Let's get the school finished and all that stuff. And they actually do it. So how do you think that affects our mental state? Because from what I hear from you is that anxiety rates are going through the roof and people have started to commit suicide. What is your perspective on that?
So suicide rates are definitely going up in India.
Yeah.
Government does not give us a very clear breakup of age-wise suicide numbers. They give us big chunks, like we have this 15 to 29 age group chunk. That information is available through National Crime Records Bureau.
Okay.
And suicide is in first 2 or 3 causes of death for that age group, and very soon will probably the leading cause of death for 15 to 29 age group. So that is
Really?
something very serious. Well, we must also know that the rates of death because of infection, because of medical complications are going down. So this kind of looks up or stays up, and even the absolute numbers are going up. There is no doubt about it. So going back to the question of does your generation have it easy? I would say it's easy on one end. On day-to-day basis, the basic Anna Vastra Nivara stuff is probably easier. But then once everybody reaches that level, there is always a next level to achieve. So no generation really has it easy.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, you don't have probably parents who beat you up, but then you have a chance that you will get beaten up in your school by the bullies and nobody will take any action because schools do not wield that authority anymore. So the challenges remain. There are challenges with every generation, and I think they are getting more and more difficult. So if anything, I think my generation had it a lot more easy than yours.
Or simple.
Or
Non-complex.
yeah, simple is probably a much better word.
Non-complex.
It was less complicated. Parameters were fairly easy, and if you had a decent brain, a decent body, and a decent family, they were quite easily achievable.
Absolutely.
Being employed was enough.
Yeah.
Everybody didn't have to have a car and a new car every 2 years and 3 years and 1 million followers on
Or a new
Instagram.
smartphone every
Yeah,
every
you were
6
happy
months.
if nobody was following you
Yeah.
and you were left to yourself, right? So that's the
Yeah,
difference.
we actually had landlines then. And we knew all our friends' landline numbers by heart. We didn't have any device to store them on.
And we had the freedom not to be traced by our parents all the time.
Absolutely.
Right? There were no GPS in our phones or there were no phones. We were the free range chicken.
Yeah.
We could go wherever we wanted.
Absolutely.
So it had its own dangers. See, I'm not glorifying the past. It had its own horrendous dangers. There is no doubt about it. But saying that this generation has it easy is a lazy way out.
Yeah.
That's not the whole truth.
Okay. And also based on certain things that are also said on like news channels these days about our generation, that since you've spoken about technology, that before it used to be like this and now it's become so advanced that it drives every single aspect of our lives. So why is that still making us so much busier than before? For example, students these days, including myself, have technology so that education can be made a little bit easier. At least that's what the intention was. Like Google, now ChatGPT, Bard. And now when I asked my dad, did you go through the same stuff when you were my age in school? Did you have so many assignments? He says no. So why is it becoming so much more difficult, and what is your opinion on the impact of mental health of those kids who are going through this?
I think I'm going to go out on a limb and put myself out there.
Okay.
I think the education that your generation has to face
Yeah.
is quite fake education.
Okay.
Let us compare it to the generation of your parents and me. We are of the same generation. Our parents were okay with us going to school every day and coming back every day and finishing homework on time.
Okay.
Your generation's teachers have to face the parents who demand their money's worth. If certain projects are not given in your school, if certain things are not forced by your school, if certain competitions are not held in your school, if certain number of students don't ace certain competitions, if certain things are not done, your parents are customers of the school. And the customer drives the culture. So now we have schools right from KG to PhD who are paper based. They want to show that they are doing more and more.
Yeah.
They want to justify the obnoxious fees
Even if
that
it
they
burns
charge.
them out, they want to add that one thing.
Absolutely, and it has no value whatsoever at all.
But how will you convince someone who of that background who's watching this? He'll to say कि अरे ये तो बस एक डॉक्टर है, उनको क्या पता मैं किस टाइम से गुजर रहा हूँ.
My take is that take it easy on education. You don't have to participate in everything. Choose one area every year and just participate in that. You don't have to participate in every competition that is available in your school. You don't have to ace everything. You don't have to have 99 percentile in everything. Do your homework or whatever you can finish in that day, and that is it. In fact, for my kids, and I have advised this to a lot of people who have tried it out, it is important to put a limit on number of hours that you spend on education every day. That if you have come back from school, I don't think you should be studying for more than 1 to 1.5 hours every day. Rest of the time you should be doing something else. So your generation and parents of your generation have to learn to be smart to finish all that work in 1 hour or 1.5 hours. And if anything spills beyond that, just let it go. It's not important. Because if a kid can't play outside for 2.5 hours, can't play piano or guitar or whatever that they like, if they can't just sit and look out of the window for half an hour, I think it's a life wasted. If they don't have time to read what they like, if they don't have time to pursue a hobby that they like.
Oh, watch a movie.
Exactly.
And see, speaking of hobbies right now, almost everyone I speak to my age or plus minus 5 years says that they don't really have a hobby. Like you said, reading what they like. Reading is becoming a dying art now. Sports are becoming dying art. Music is becoming a dying art right now. So, do you think that the effect of certain drugs, both psychedelic and normal drugs like weed, vape, I don't know what effect the vape does because I've never done these things, is driving them towards these things?
I know your dad is watching you. You can't confess this.
No, seriously, I've never done. So, what are your opinions on these drugs that are freely being used? Because I remember people in my school used to go to the toilet and do it. So, what are your opinions on these drugs being given? Do you think they are driving them towards these hobbyless lives?
Or is it just normal nowadays, considered normal to just only study? Is that where we're heading?
So people are definitely a lot more busy in doing things. What they do for that much time and what they get out of it is very questionable. That is something that as parents I think we need to think about. That what are we pushing our kids into? Yeah. Again, going about drugs and vaping and the tobacco part, we've always, as humans, we have always sought two kind of drugs. One are the performance enhancers, and second are the ones which will make us feel better for short term. I mean, till the Narcotic Substances and Psychotropic Drugs Act came into action, none of this was illegal in India.
Yeah.
Right? We, for God's sake, we invented cannabis.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
That was part of our culture. As far as performance enhancing drugs are concerned, we are at a very complicated juncture. There are a lot of drugs which are artificially created in lab, the synthetic drugs, which are way more dangerous or can be way more dangerous than what is available naturally. Again, I'm not pushing weed.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to say here is that we cannot have a single parameter to talk about everything from coffee to LSD.
Absolutely.
They
I
need
agree
to be
with that.
differentiated.
Absolutely.
There is enough and more research available about what is the dangerousness of it all, and that becomes government's responsibility.
And if somebody who's in high school or middle school right now and who's gotten into this entire path of vaping or taking some kind of drug as a pill or whatever form they're taking it, how, and if they want to get out of it, how would you advise them to do so? And they are very afraid to confess to their parents कि मैं कर रहा हूँ ये सब.
So young brain is extremely vulnerable to all of these things. There is huge amount of research available now which tells us that almost till 25 years of age, all these drugs can damage your brain very seriously.
Yeah,
And the younger the user is, bigger and
the impact is.
bigger the damage, and it's non-reversible. It's non-reversible. That is what we are looking at. So, and other than parents, who's going to help the kid to get out of it? So, I would say that hold on to that fear and please talk to your parents, or at least talk to your family doctor. Pick up the phone, use the national phone helpline, talk to the counselor at the other end. But get help. Don't suffer alone. Because loneliness is not going to solve this.
It's going to make it worse.
Yeah, and you at your age are not going to be able to solve this totally by yourself. Help will be needed. So get help.
So now, since you've brought up this entire topic of getting help from somebody professional or even if it's someone from your house, there's an entire culture now that you have to go to therapists at whatever age. Mostly it's my age only now. And that it's being odd to not go to a therapist. How do you perceive that as the person on the professional end? Because they are trying to romanticize these things, like he rightly said.
To be honest, all kids are not going to therapy.
Yeah.
The number of kids who are actually in some kind of psychotherapy or getting regular mental health help, at least in schools in India, is less than 5%. So 95 kids out of 100 are not getting any help at all.
But 5% is a very big number.
That is, yeah, but that is again the number of kids who are actively taking help in upper middle class upwards educational systems, which is probably not even 2% of total India. This is the differentiation that we must have, that there are kids not more than 5 kilometers away from where we are sitting who have horrendous mental health issues and there is no help available. So a kid who feels that they are in distress and need to get help should at least get an assessment. Is that something that needs to be treated by a health professional, or that is something that can be helped by family and school, is something that needs to be decided. But I wouldn't mock at the habit of going to therapy. The question is, are we going to destroy the normal completely? Is feeling sad, feeling scared, feeling alone, is everything a mental illness? That is where I think I don't agree.
Would you ever prescribe a drug such as cannabis to any patient of yours? Have you ever had any such cases, if you're comfortable to talk about it?
No, cannabis is not a medical drug.
Okay.
Not in India, not at this point of time. It is illegal to prescribe cannabis in India. It is not a medicinal drug at all. In fact, cannabis use is not illegal, but producing and selling cannabis is definitely illegal. So as a doctor, I would never do that.
So, Doc, I wanted to hear your opinion on legalizing certain drugs. Just as alcohol is legal in certain countries after the age of 18, what is your opinion on legalizing drugs?
See, we come from a historical position where no drugs were illegal.
Yeah.
Okay?
In India.
Anywhere in the world. At some point of time, governments started banning drugs one by one. USA, as usual, being the lab of the world, has even tried banning liquor. What we know from these historical experiments is that no ban has ever worked. India has dry states. There are countries in the world like Saudi Arabia where even alcohol is banned, but even they have alcohol problem.
It's always going from under the table.
Correct. So there is a certain fraction of population that will seek these things out. They will create them, they will manufacture them at home if it is needed, but they will still use it. So now a more informed view is that instead of banning stuff and hoping that it will go away, it is better to legalize it, monitor it and tax it than anything else.
Like Colorado.
Like
the first
Colorado,
state.
like Portugal.
Yeah.
I think, India is so focused on US that bigger, better and more sensible experiments happening in the rest of the world are completely ignored. Like North Europe. or even South Europe like Portugal.
Now Thailand is now completely legalized.
Exactly. For 15, I think 10 to 15 years, all drugs have been perfectly legal in Portugal. And we have enough data. People were worried that if you legalize everything, entire population will become drug addict. Nothing like that has happened. The rates of drug addiction haven't gone up. What has changed is crime has gone down. And police are now free to do other work rather than running after drug
And
change.
you're bringing in good tax
Absolutely.
money into the state exchequer.
Absolutely. So I am of this firm opinion with many of my colleagues working in this field that legalization of drugs is the future. That is more democratic, more scientifically informed, and financially and socially a much more sensible way to go ahead.
So most people look at drugs as a small temporary escape from their certain problems that they may be dealing, which is
But so is Bollywood.
definitely.
Yeah.
So then, how would you recommend monitoring these things? Because certain people may take a drug and do certain things in public which may not be acceptable. So how would you recommend monitoring
So
that?
again, I'm not an expert in de-addiction and all of that. We have national agencies and excellent psychiatrists working in that area. But there are enough models all over the world where monitoring is in place. You need better police for that. You need a lot better and less corrupt police force, which is the law enforcement agency, to do this. And once government puts its mind to it, we can do it. I think India, which pioneered the electronic payment methods, right? We have the technology, we have the people. I don't think it is impossible in India. In fact, I believe that if there is one country in the world who can do this, that's India. We can do it properly, we can do it legally, we can monitor it properly, and we can make it happen. Again, I'm not taking a position that everybody should pick up a pipe and start smoking.
Sure.
As a psychiatrist, as somebody who has seen people getting their lives ruined in that, I'm saying that not a great idea, don't do it. But that does not mean that bans are going to work. These are two very different things.
Yeah, so I think we've had a great discussion so far, and thank you, Doc, for coming on the show. I think I feel much more normal now that that crying and mourning is normal and it's not a mental disorder as it's being made out to be by a lot of people around me. And my final question here is that so it's been around 4 months since my wife passed away, and I have been in a lot of grief. I'm mourning a lot. I cry a lot, and especially because like you mentioned, the intensity of grief is directly proportional to the intensity of love that you've received. And she was very devoted to me in the sense that she was so devoted to me that even she would cut my nails every 15 days regularly, without even like clockwork. So these kind of things obviously increase grief, and I am at that stage. My question to you is that what is the flipping point, the tipping point, where you feel that a person like me going through at this stage of grief should at least consider seeing a professional like yourself?
I think that's a very important question, and thank you very much for asking that. The answer is multifold. One is that when you yourself feel that you're actually finding this grief as a burden, you can't take it anymore. It's too much. And you yourself are feeling uncomfortable about it, distressed about it. That is the time to get help. Second is, now that 3 to 4 months have passed, the tradition dictates that you go back to your duties. If you are able to function, if you are able to do your duties, and there are longer and longer periods of time where you feel absolutely okay, you are not grieving continuously anymore, you are doing all right. If the grieving is 24/7 thing for you, you are unable to get out of it, if you are ignoring your normal duties, or if you have started losing interest in your life and people around you themselves, then it is the time to go and consult a mental health professional and seek help. That would be the differentiating line.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Right? So thank you, Doc. Thank you so much for coming on our show. And I'm glad that we talked about some stuff that people generally don't talk about. I hope that this episode has been insightful to so many people who are watching this. It has been very insightful to me personally. because it's really helped me a lot. Just this discussion of half an hour, 45 minutes with Doc has really opened up my own eyes to so many things. And to consider myself normal at this stage is the biggest blessing that I can ask for. Thank you so much, Doc.
Thank you very much for inviting me.